We're at the end of this book where the Shaykh talks about ijtihad and taqleed. Ijtihad, which is the deduction, the judgment deduction, and taqleed, which is mimicking scholars. This is a topic under another field, which is the field called Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh, the fundamentals of fiqh, or the principles of fiqh. So you have a science called fiqh. Fiqh is the science that pertains to the practical rules. That means how you make wudu. You say, wudu has 6 integrals: the intention, washing the face, washing the arms, forearms, wiping the head, washing the feet, keeping the order. So that's practical rules, the rules listed out for you, how to do it. That's fiqh. The rules, the detailed rules, the practical rules that are taken directly from the Quran and the Sunnah. Because there's an ayah in the Quran that tells us how to make wudu. The ayah in the Quran tells us, if you want to pray, do this, and this, and this, and this. So that's what the Quran instructed. So then the scholars, they take that from the Quran and whatever's in the hadiths and anything that's relevant there, and their knowledge of Arabic language and whatever else. And then they will talk and deduce judgments and things like that. That's fiqh. There's another science, it's called Usul al-Fiqh. Usul means origins or bases. I'm saying principles of fiqh. It's a different science. That's the science about basically how the mujtahid deduces the judgments. How does the mujtahid in the end get to the end and say these are the integrals of prayer, these are the integrals of wudu, these are the invalidators of wudu? What's his process that gets him to his end? The end is the fiqh itself, yani, according to that mujtahid. The fiqh according to that mujtahid. That's the end. That's what we learn when we learn obligatory knowledge, how to make wudu, how to pray, how to fast. We're learning like the end of a long process. Where that process started with a master scholar. This master scholar, using a science, gets to another science. This science he uses to get to the other science is called usul, fundamentals or principles of fiqh. It's a clockwork that the mujtahid uses to deduce his judgments. But this book, As-Sirat Al-Mustaqim, and its explanation is what topic? The topic of aqidah, creed. It's not fiqh and it's not usul al-fiqh. However, the scholars of aqidah have since the old days, they have mentioned some things from usul al-fiqh in the books of aqidah. Even if you look in the aqidah of An-Nasafi, towards the back, it talks about ijtihad. If the mujtahid gives a judgment, if he's right or if he's wrong. And in other books of aqidah, they mention some principles of, or they have some mentioning of ijtihad, or even some other rules of usul al-fiqh. So all we want to talk about from here is some things that are taken from the science of usul al-fiqh and have been deposited in this book of aqidah. For one, because that's already something the scholars would do. And for two, because in this day of ours, the Wahhabis have deviated in this issue of taqleed, ijtihad and taqleed. So it's even more appropriate for the Shaykh to go into this issue. Because don't the Wahhabis say, or some of them, really this is their creed, we just follow the Quran and the Sunnah. They mean we don't take these madhabs. And they say don't be a blind follower. They mean don't adhere to a madhab. Just take from the Quran and the Sunnah. And then what they do is they basically take the mujtahid out of the picture and put themselves in his position. And that's what, when somebody does that, what's he going to do to you? He's going to say, la, here's the ayah right here. Here's the hadith right here. It's going to be really his own deduction. And he's not qualified. Do they mention the scholars like Ash-Shafi'i and Malik? Yeah, they do. But only to serve their agenda, not because they really care about following madhabs. They don't follow any particular madhab. Or if they did, they'd claim to be Hanbalis. So we read some of this already. We started, and we didn't finish this thing about Naskh, I believe, here. So what I'll do, I'm going to start from the top of this subtitle here, or this statement of the author. قال المؤلف رحمه الله, said the author, may Allah have mercy upon him. ومعرفة الناسخ والمنسوخ, and knowing the abrogating and the abrogated. So this is part of the clockwork that the mujtahid uses to arrive at his answers. He needs to know what abrogates something else and what's been abrogated by something else. If you want an alternative word, you might want to say abolish. An abolisher, like an abolishing ayah of the Quran, an ayah that comes and abolishes another ayah from the Quran. So the abolishing and the abolish and the abolished, can we say invalidate? I would suggest not to say invalidate, because we use it with a meaning usually. When we talk about, let's say, the prayer and that how you can start your prayer and what you might do that breaks your prayer, and wudu or fasting and like that. So we're not talking about that here. You could use the word invalidate and then just explain what you mean here, but I would suggest to reserve that word for that issue. And this needs another word. Like, usually people say abrogate, but I think abolish is a good word. Because abolish means that there's a law and then a new law came to remove that law. So amongst what the mujtahid needs to deduce judgments is ma'rifah, familiarity with an-nasikh wal-mansukh, the abolishing text and the abolished, or the abolishing text and the abolished. The abolishing text and the abolished, or the abrogating text and the abrogated. So what's going to abrogate something else? It's going to be an ayah from the Quran or a hadith of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. Nothing more. No consensus of the scholars is an abrogator. Consensus is not an abrogator, because abrogation is part of the revelation. And an ijtihad or a legal comparison is not an abrogator. So the nasikh is going to be an ayah from the Quran or a hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Now, can a hadith abrogate an ayah? That's another discussion. The abrogated, what's the abrogated going to be? The abrogated, it could be the recitation and script of an ayah of the Quran with its rule too. There's an ayah of the Quran that has a rule. It could be that an abrogator comes and removes what we would be reciting and what we would be writing as Quran, as the text of the Quran, and also removes the rule that's there too. And it's possible that what's abrogated is only the recitation and the script, and the rule will remain. So there would be an ayah in the Quran that proves something. then the ayah would be removed, abrogated, that is, you no longer recite it and you no longer write it if you wanted to write out a Quran. But the rule that came with that ayah is still valid. We'll see, inshallah. And it's possible that the rule gets abolished, but the ayah in recitation and script remains. And we'll see, inshallah ta'ala. So the author says, Ash-SharH, the explanation, Naskh lughatan ma'nahu al-izala. Abrogation, yani nasikh in Arabic language, linguistically, according to Arabic language, means removal. Wa hadduhu, and its definition, its technical definition. And this definition is being taken from what field? Field of usul al-fiqh. So here we are in an aqidah book. We're giving definitions from another field. Because two different fields could possibly use the same word, and they're going to define them differently. We're taking this word out of from one field, and we're defining it from the field we took it. وَحَدُّهُ هُوَ الْخِطَابُ الدَّالُ عَلَى رَفْعِ الْحُكْمِ ثَابِتٍ بالخطاب المتقدم على وجه لولاه لكان ثابتا مع تراخيه عنه. Its definition is the address. Address means words were directed to you. Speech was directed to you. That's an address. Someone addresses you. It is the address that proves the lifting, yani the removal of an established rule. A rule that was established by a prior address. There was a rule established by an address. Then there came a new address. This second address lifts that previously established rule, the rule that was previously established by its own address, in such a way that had it not been for the subsequent address, the first one would have remained firm. The first one would have remained confirmed. And this subsequent address is disconnected from the prior one. The second one is disconnected from the first one. It came delayed after the first one. So there was a prior rule, there was an address with a rule. A rule was established by an address. Who's the addresser? God. God is the addresser here. Yani, we say Allah Ta'ala has khitab. Khitabullah, the address, God's address, that is. Like when Allah says in the Quran, Wa aqimu salah, perform the prayer. This is an address from God. Or observe the prayer. So an address would come with a rule, and now it's confirmed and established and settled. Then, after some time, a new address comes removing this previously established address or rule, removing this previously established rule. That's abrogation. ويقال رفع حكم شرعي سابق بحكم شرعي لاحق. It is said, yani, in simpler words, it is defined as, in simpler words, the removal of a prior religious judgment by a subsequent religious judgment. And remember here, abrogation exists across sacred laws and exists within any independent sacred law. This means that Allah sends a messenger with a law, and then he sends a new messenger with a new law. That's naskh, abrogation, or abolishing. And it's valid that Allah reveals a law to a messenger, and in that messenger's life, Allah will abolish that law and put a new law in its place. That's also abrogation. Both of those are really the same thing. Question. Let me see who's in the audience here. I have a question for you. Do you know a proof? Do you know a reference for a prophet other than Muhammad receiving an abrogation? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The story of Abraham alayhi salatu wassalam. Didn't Allah reveal to Abraham to sacrifice his son? Yes. Didn't Allah reveal to Abraham to not sacrifice his son? Yes. That's Naskh. The Shaykh says, وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ الرَّسْمِ وَبَقَاءُ الْحُكْمِ. It is permissible to abrogate the script, yani what's written as Quran, with the remainder of its rule, while its rule remains. أي يجوز نسخ رسم الآية في المصحف وتلاوتها على أنها قرآن. Meaning it is valid, it is possible to abrogate, yani that there would be abrogation for the script of an ayah in the book of the Quran, as well as its recitation as Quran, while the rule that came with that remains valid. مع بقاء حكمها والتكليف به. While its rule remains, and there is still accountability to adhere to this rule. نحو آية الرجم, like the verse about stoning the adulterer. وهي الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما البتة نكالا من الله. That ayah was this one that I just read for you. The sheikh and the female sheikh, this means they have been married before and they had sexual intercourse with an invalid marriage contract. That's what sheikh and female sheikh mean here. If they commit adultery, yani if they fornicate after this status, then stone both of them to death as an exemplary punishment from God. So this is no longer an ayah of the Quran. We're not going to say that's an ayah from the Quran. It's been abrogated. It was an ayah. But the rule that came with this ayah is still applicable. Hadith deniers deny that though, because they say we only want the Quran. So when they found the ayah is not there, they're going to say, and they do say, then the rule doesn't apply anymore. وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ الْحُكْمِ وَبَقَاءُ الرَّسْمِ. And it's valid and possible to abrogate the rule, to abolish the rule while the script remains. So it would still be written within a mushaf and recited as Quran, but it's not applicable. مِثْلُ قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, like the saying of God exalted is He, وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا وَصِيَّةً لِأَزْوَاجِهِمْ مَتَاعًا إِلَى الْحَوْلِ. The 240th verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. This means those who pass away amongst you and you leave behind wives, يعني, not translating very literally, the meaning here is the waiting period for the widow is the complete year. نسخت بالآية التي قبلها. That was abrogated by the verse before it. يعني, a verse before it. MashaAllah. That was abrogated by the verse before it. That means by a verse before it, because it's the 234th verse that abrogated the 240th verse, not the 239th. One of the verses before the one we're discussing abrogates that verse. Now, before I read that, someone might say, how's that? I'm confused here. Didn't you say that the abrogator has to come later? So first there comes an address, and then there comes another address lifting the rule that came with the first address. Now you're telling me here's an ayah that has a rule, and that this rule is abolished by the ayah before it? How could that be? And the answer is, as you know, the Quran is, the Mus'haf, I mean, is not arranged in the order in which the verses were revealed. The verses of the Quran came down on the Prophet ﷺ in installments. Sometimes part of a surah would come to him, sometimes an entire surah would come to him. And the Prophet ﷺ would always be waiting for Jibreel to come and give him an update. And that here are more ayahs and they go here. And here are more ayahs and they go here. And by the time the Prophet ﷺ, at the end of his life, he did teach the Sahaba. By the end of his life, throughout his life, he was teaching the Sahaba the sequence of the Quran, the Mus'haf, or the Quran book. So that's how basically this later verse is actually placed earlier in the surah by the angel's instruction to the Prophet ﷺ of where to put the verses. And then the Prophet ﷺ instructing his companions what the angel taught him. That's right. The angel told the Prophet ﷺ where to put the verses. The verses were not revealed in their recited order. Yeah. Isn't the first thing revealed to the Prophet, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق? But the first surah of the Quran is Al-Fatiha. Yes. Do we know the reason why they are in that order? I don't remember a reason why they're in that order. I don't remember learning a reason why they're in that order. But maybe there's something in As-Suyuti's book, Al-Itqan, about that. It's the best book authored about the sciences of the Quran. But the one who studies the Quran, though, and understands it, he will see the progression of information, how it is. How does the Quran progress? You will notice not only how it progresses, also how it digresses. How does the Quran actually progress, and how does it digress, and how does it repeat? So what's this ayah? وَهِي يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. They wait, those widows, they wait for 4 months and 10 days. So they used to have to wait for a year, and then that was abolished, and it was reduced to 4 months and 10 days. وَيَجُوزُ النَّسْخُ إِلَى بَدَلٍ. It's valid and possible that the result of the abrogation is a replacement. A replacement. كما في نسخ استقبال بيت المقدس باستقبال الكعبة. Just as was the case about abrogating facing Jerusalem for facing the Kaaba. It used to be first that they faced the Kaaba. Then the Muslims moved to Medina. While there, they were commanded to face Jerusalem for some time. Then they were commanded to again face the Kaaba. They faced Jerusalem for over a year. Why? So that a prophecy that the Jews had would come true, which was that the Jews had the prophecy of the prophet who faces the two Qiblas. They knew that the last prophet would be, one of his descriptions that they had known there was going to be a sign for him is that he would face the two Qiblas. What are the two Qiblas? The Qibla of Abraham and the Qibla of the Israelites. وَيَجُوزُ النَّسْخُ إِلَى غَيْرِ بَدَلٍ. And it's possible and valid that the abrogation does not result in any replacement. كما في نسخ قوله تعالى, like in the case of the abrogation of what God said, exalted is He. إذا ناجيتم الرسول فقدموا بين يدي نجواكم صدقة. O believers, when you seek private counsel with the messenger, then offer a charity. So this was abrogated. So you could, after the abrogation, seek the private counsel of the messenger without offering a charity. There's no replacement for this. وَيَجُوزُ النَّسْخُ. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's from the angel, because all the ayahs of the Quran came from the angel to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Yes. The Quran, we say the Quran was revealed twice. Yeah. Once it was revealed completely even with all of what is now abrogated. When was that revealed? That was revealed the night before the angel came down to the Prophet in the cave. The angel brought it down to the lowest sky, the whole thing. That's considered that the Quran was revealed right there. So the Quran was revealed by the angel bringing this complete Quran down to the lowest sky. And the Quran then was revealed on earth to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in installments. That's the second revelation of the Quran. It was basically, throughout his 20-something years of receiving the Quran, it was basically being edited by revelation. And that's going to come. Yeah. Yeah. It is important to know that it's not because God changes his mind or something like that. That's going to come. I don't know if we'll reach it today, but it's here. وَيَجُوزُ النَّسْخُ إِلَى مَا هُوَ أَغْلَظُ. And it's valid that the resulting replacement rule is tougher or more strenuous. أغلظ, thicker, denser. كما في نسخ التخيير بين صوم رمضان والفدية وَالْفِدْيَةِ بِالطَّعَامِ إِلَى تَعْيِينِ الصَّوْمِ. Like in the case of the choice between fasting and feeding being abrogated to only fasting. It used to be permissible for someone to not fast, although he's able to, if he will feed someone instead. That was abrogated and became only that you have to fast. That's correct. Good question. What if, I think your question basically is, what if a person didn't know about the new rule? Okay. Then that's potentially a problem. So that's what happens when a person is ignorant. You might fall into something. For example, wasn't it permissible to drink? It was permissible to drink wine. Then it was abrogated, and some people didn't know its abrogation, that it became haram. Yeah, they did drink, and they still got whipped anyway. There's even the report, you know about mut'ah, which is what the Shiites do? It's basically prostitution. It is, it amounts to, one might say, it amounts to renting a woman. It's some kind of a marriage contract. It's not a real marriage, though. So he basically says to the woman, or she says to him, I give myself to you for a month, or something like that. And then he pays her, which is her dowry, so-called, or whatever it's called. Maybe it has another name, since this is mut'ah. He pays her payment, and the deal is she's his for whatever time they agreed on. That was permissible at some time. That was valid. Then it was abrogated. Then it was legalized again by the Prophet ﷺ. And then it was abrogated until Resurrection Day. That's what the Messenger said. The second time it was abrogated, the Prophet said, it is abrogated until Resurrection Day. Some people didn't know this abrogation. Yeah. So it was reported about one person, this high-ranking person too, that he didn't know about the abrogation of the mut'ah. He was still doing it. He told someone about mut'ah he did. So that person said to him, Innaka rajulun ta'ih, you are a lost man. Don't you know that the Messenger of Allah abrogated this? One person who was talking like he's going to do the mut'ah, the ruler told him, you do it if you want to do it. I'm going to punish you. Yani basically told him, do it if you dare. I will punish you. وَيَجُوزُ النَّسْخُ إِلَى مَا هُوَ أَخَفُ. And it's valid that abrogation would lead to something lighter. كَمَا فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, just as in what God said, exalted is He. إِن يَكُن مِّنكُمْ عِشْرُونَ صَابِرُونَ يَغْلِبُوا مِئَتَيْنِ. The 65th verse of Surah Al-Anfal. It means, if there are amongst you 20 enduring ones, you shall defeat 200 in battle. 20 verse 200. That's how those Sahabas were doing. Yeah, Yani, most important thing is, this is the rule that was revealed. The meaning of this ayah is, you can't run away. 20 enduring ones cannot run away from 200 kuffar. Yani, take enduring out if you want to. You 20 Muslims, you can't run away from 200 kuffar. ثم قال, but then Allah said, الآن خفف الله عنكم. Now Allah has lightened on you. وعلم أن فيكم ضعفا. And He knew that there is weakness in you. It means He knew that there shall be weakness in you. فَإِن يَكُن مِّنكُم مِّئَةٌ صَابِرَةٌ يَغْلِبُوا مِئَتَيْنِ. So if there be amongst you 100 enduring ones, then you shall defeat 200. Now this means, now the rule is 100 Muslims cannot run away from 200 kuffar. So that's an easier rule. وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ الْكِتَابِ بِالْكِتَابِ. And it's valid that something of the Quran would abrogate something else of the Quran. كَمَا فِي آيَتَيِ الْعِدَّةِ وَآيَتَيِ الْمُصَابَرَةِ. Like in the case of the two verses of the widow's waiting period and the two verses about the enduring soldiers or the enduring fighters. وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ السُنَّةِ بِالْكِتَابِ. And it's valid to abrogate the prophetic practice that's established by a hadith by an ayah of the Quran. That the Prophet ﷺ would have established a prophetic practice that's not in the Quran, a sunnah, by a sunnah. He established a sunnah, and then this sunnah would be abrogated by an ayah of the Quran. كما في نسخ استقبال بيت المقدس الثابت بالسنة الفعلية في حديث الصحيحين. Just as is the case of facing Jerusalem, this facing of Jerusalem itself, its proof is the Prophet's practice. That's in the hadith of the two authentic books. Not an ayah from the Quran. Not an ayah from the Quran that has the directive of facing Jerusalem. It was the Prophet's practice that proved this. That should be a strong proof against a hadith denier. If I talk to a hadith denier, I would argue this. Because only way out here is for him to deny that they ever faced Jerusalem. He can't do that. بِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى. That is abrogated by the 144th verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. This saying of God, exalted is He. فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. Turn yourself the direction of the sacred mosque. That means the one that's in Mecca. وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ السُنَّةِ بِالسُنَّةِ. And it's valid that the sunnah would be abrogated by the sunnah. كَمَا فِي حَدِيثِ Muslim, just like in Muslim's hadith. كُنْتُ نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْ زِيَارَةِ الْقُبُورِ أَلَا فَزُورُوهَا. I previously forbade you from visiting the graves. Hear ye, go visit them. Some scholars said this hadith contains the rare case of the abrogation and the abrogating mentioned in one statement. Because if you look at all the examples we took, if you look at all the examples we took here, each example required two proofs. This hadith has in it both sides, one hadith with both sides in it. وَيَجُوزُ نَسْخُ الْمُتَوَاتِرِ بِالْمُتَوَاتِرِ مِنْهُمَا. And a successive mass report validly abrogates a successive mass report of whether Quran or Sunnah. A successive mass report abrogates a successive mass report, whether Quran or Sunnah. ويجوز نسخ الآحاد بالآحاد وبالمتواتر. And the report of individuals is validly abrogated by a report of individuals, as well as by a successive mass report. ولا يجوز نسخ المتواتر بالآحاد. And it's not valid to abrogate a successive mass report by a report of individuals. Because a successive mass report is definitive evidence, while a report of individuals is not definitive evidence. Yes. So after the Shaykh went through all these scenarios, Yani, let me repeat. After the Shaykh went through all these different scenarios of abrogation, he came down to a final scenario, which was, Yani, his scenarios, he funneled all the way down to abrogating Quran by Quran and abrogating hadith by hadith, and abrogating Quran, abrogating hadith by Quran. Now, can you abrogate Quran by hadith? So he says it's valid that a successive mass report abrogates a successive mass report, whether Quran or Sunnah. All of the Quran is a successive mass report. All of the Quran is a successive mass report. Some Sunnah is successive mass report. Any Sunnah that is a successive mass report is what? Definitively authentic. 100% definitively authentic. Therefore, it is strong enough to abrogate an ayah from the Quran, because it's impossible for a successive mass report to be incorrect. And it's valid to abrogate the report of individuals. That means what's narrated by some person or two people or three people. It's valid to abrogate the report of individuals by a report of individuals. Yani, the scholars came across a hadith that's narrated by a person or two people or three people, for example. It's not a successive mass report. It has a rule. It's authentic hadith, so they used it. Then there was a later hadith, a hadith that came later than that one. It also is narrated by one person or two people or three people. And it's authentic, so they use it, and they're going to use this one to abrogate the other one. Although being a report of individuals narrated by one or two or three people, it's not a definitive evidence. It won't be a definitive evidence until it reaches successive mass report level. And then he says, وَلَا يَجُوزُ نَسْخُ الْمُتَوَاتِرِ بِالْآحَادِ. But it's not possible or valid to abrogate a successive mass report by a report of individuals, because a successive mass report is definitively correct, 100%, while a report of individuals could possibly be false. So it's not strong enough to abolish a definitive proof. And then here the Shaykh goes into what you mentioned about that this doesn't imply that God changes his mind or anything. So the Shaykh says, Tanbih, notice, لا يلزم من النسخ البداء. It's not necessary that because there's something called abrogation that God has an epiphany or that God changes his mind. كما ادعت اليهود أن النسخ باطل لأنه يؤدي إلى أن الله ظهر له أمر كان خافيا عليه. This is what's claimed by the Jews, that abrogation is invalid because it leads to say that God became aware of something that he didn't know. ومعنى البداء ظهور أمر كان خافيا. The meaning of this Arabic word, al-bada', this is the name of a conviction that some people have. Well, Yes, that's true. But what it means, just basically, linguistically, is the appearance of something that was hidden. The appearance of something that was hidden. Usually I translate it as, in the context of aqidah, when we talk about this issue of abrogation and the will of God and destiny, I would translate bada as epiphany, or God changing his mind. And the meaning here is that bada is invalid. We don't believe in it. Sunni Muslims don't have a conviction about something called bada. Bada is the talk of destiny deniers. That God had an epiphany, or he changed his mind about something. يقال لهم, it is said to those Jews, النسخ لا يستلزم ذلك. Abrogation doesn't dictate this. بل فيه حكمة. Rather, abrogation has wisdom. لأن أحوال العباد لأن أحوال لأن أحوال العباد ومصالحهم تختلف باختلاف الأزمان. Because the situations of the God slaves and their welfares vary as time changes. كما أن الطبيب يصف الدواء في وقت, just as a doctor prescribes some medicine at a time, وينهى عنه في وقت آخر, and then he will discontinue this medicine for that patient later. لكون الوقت الأول مناسبا لحال المريض, because the first time was appropriate for the case or the situation of the sick person. غير مناسب لحاله الثاني, but it's not appropriate for his second situation. فالله تعالى عالم بمصالح عباده. God, exalted is he, is knower of the welfares of his slaves. فينزل حكما ثم ينسخه. And so he will reveal a rule and then abolish it. لما في ذلك من مصلحة العباد, because it has the slaves' welfare in it. ومرادهم بدفع النسخ تأييد دعواهم أن موسى قال إن شريعتي باقية إلى يوم القيامة. And the motivation of the Jews for refusing abrogation is to support their claim that Moses said, my sacred law is perpetual until resurrection day. افتروا على موسى ما لم يقله. They lied on Moses. They lied on Moses and said that he said what he never said. Well, correct. He never said that. That's for sure, because Jesus came after Moses with a new law, and then Muhammad came after Jesus with a new law. Yeah, so there's no way Moses said that, that his law is perpetual until resurrection day. وهم يعلمون أن الجمع بين أختين كان جائزا في شرع يعقوب. And those Jews, they know that in the law of Jacob, it was permissible to marry two sisters at the same time. ثم نسخ الله تعالى ذلك في شرع موسى, and then Allah abolished that in the law of Moses. So how can they deny abrogation? ويكفي لرد دعواهم أن تزويج الأخ بالأخت التي ليست توأما له كان جائزا في شرع آدم. And it's enough to refute their claim that marrying a brother to a sister who was not his twin was permissible in the law of Adam. So Shaykh is posing this as if the Jews know this too. We know this. Maybe the Christians don't know it. I'd be surprised if they did. But yeah, maybe the Jews know this too. Because if they don't know it, then if you present it as an argument, then it means then if they deny it, then you're going to have to explain it. So you probably wouldn't want to present it as an argument unless they knew it, so that you don't have to go through the process of explaining it. He says, and it is enough to refute their claim that a brother would be given a sister who's not his twin in marriage. That was permissible in the sacred law of Adam. لأن آدم كان يزوج الرجل من بنيه بأخته التي هي توأمة أخ له آخر. Because Adam used to marry a man amongst his sons to his sister, who was another brother's twin. وَلَا يُزَوِّجُ وَاحِدًا مِّنْهُمْ بِتَوْأَمَتِهِ. And he would not marry one of them to his twin, to his own twin. ثُمَّ نَسَخَ اللَّهُ ذَلِكَ بَعْدَهُ. And then Allah abrogated that after him. وَهَذَا مَعْلُومٌ عِنْدَهُمْ. That's the Shaykh answered my question right there. And this is known to them. لكن العناد يحملهم على الافتراء على موسى. However, obstinacy motivates them to lie on Moses. And the fact that what word did I use for obstinacy? Obstinacy. Being stubborn. Very stubborn. And the fact that I didn't know that the Shaykh answered my question means what? Means two things. One, I didn't memorize this, and two, I didn't even review it before I gave the lesson, or else I would have known. Any question?